90 seats. They would have unrivalled legislative power. And because of Britain's first-past-the-post voting system, even without 50% of the electorate, the Labour Party could win a massive majority of seats and have unchecked executive power. But as the will of the people is for a Labour victory, surely that has to be respected and is democratic. So for the great bit of debate this hour, I'm asking, what do you think? Is a massive majority undemocratic? Well, I'm joined by journalist Jonathan Liss and writer and broadcaster Emma Wolfe, political commentator Matthew Stadland, and also Neil Hamilton. Right, I'm going to start with you. Neil Hamilton, what do you think? A Labour massive majority, 490 seats in total?
Yeah, well, our electoral system is undemocratic in its effects, isn't it? In 2015, UKIP got 4.5 million votes in the general election and 1 seat. Scottish Nationalists got 1.5 million and they got 50-odd seats. And it looks as though in this election, at the moment, Reform are on 16% or so in the polls, which would give them maybe between 1 and 4 seats. The Lib Dems are on 11%, that's 2/3 of the Reform vote, but they would get 50 or 60 seats. So it's an absurd outcome, and the system needs root and branch reform. It doesn't represent the opinions of the majority of the people. And I was in the Welsh Parliament for 5 years, and Labour have always won the Welsh Parliament elections since devolution was created in 1999. Yet we've never had a 50% turnout of the electorate in Wales since then.
Yeah, but
Labour
Neil,
got half the seats on 1/3 of the votes.
Yeah, but Neil, the system's never going to... we have what we have, which is unfortunate, I suppose, to respect to that. And it's unlikely that the leading parties will change it because, obviously, it works in their favour. Matthew Stadland, what do you think? I mean, being almost unchallenged, there'll be nobody else, no other party can really get close. If that is how it works out in Parliament, they have over 400 seats.
Yeah, I was looking at my phone briefly there because I was fact-checking Neil, and actually I think it was in 2015 UKIP won 3.9 million votes, not 4.5 million, but that doesn't really affect his point. I think voting...
Well, I think it actually reiterates his point that anyway...
There was fewer than he said. It was fewer than he said.
Yeah, but it still should have got something.
Voting reform is probably a conversation for another day, and we have, in fact, had a referendum on voting reform in this country. We've decided to stick with first past the post. On this issue of the so-called supermajority, a new phrase that has sprung up during this campaign, look, this is just desperate tactics from the Conservatives. I think it comes down from Rishi Sunak. He must have given it the go-ahead. And it's because they are absolutely terrified of not just losing, but losing heavily. And they think the best way to claw back some votes from Reform voters, but also in some constituencies from Lib Dems, is by frightening people into this idea that Labour are going to get a massive majority. People need that. Well, let me explain.
Well, no. I'm just saying that this, according to analysis by Pollster Survation, 40,000 surveys, Labour are ahead in 456 seats. So that is, you just said, it's a tactic from the Conservative Party. So I'm just pointing out that a neutral poll has said 456 seats.
And that's very reasonable.
So that's not Tory tactics, is it?
Well, it is. But let me respond. That's a very reasonable thing to point out. You're absolutely right to do so. The polls, as they stand at the moment, are heavily in Labour's favour. What I want to make clear is that Labour, just to win a majority of 1, never mind a massive majority, a supermajority, they need a bigger swing than Tony Blair won in 1997, just to get a majority of 1 seat. So I would encourage people, get out there, don't listen to this scare tactics, vote Labour to make sure there is a Labour majority.
Yeah, well, you would say that, though. You would say that. That's what you would say. Emma Wolfe, your thoughts on this? Massive majority, over 400 seats in total, which would mean they'd literally be unchallenged.
I don't think a massive majority is undemocratic at all, but I do think it's undemocratic if millions of people's votes go without a voice, if millions of people don't have their voices heard and are not represented. I think it's pretty rich of Grant Shapps. I have to agree with holding my nose, I have to agree with Matthew on this, that actually it's pretty rich of Grant Shapps after 14 years of Tory government and, basically facing Tory extinction, for him now to be saying, we're facing a supermajority. He needs to deal with the issues in his own party rather than telling us what we can and cannot vote for.
That's all very well.
Undemocratic is when millions of people's votes are not represented in Parliament.
Jonathan Liss.
Well, I think the word supermajority is a US term that sort of means something that when you have over a certain number of seats, and then you can sort of override sort of presidential vetoes, etc. So we don't have a concept equivalent to that in this country. We just have a concept where one party can win a shed load of seats and not have the kind of checks and balances that exist in a much sort of slimmer parliament where the opposition MPs are in greater number. So, for example, the parliament that we had until 2019 has been a very different parliament from the one since then, when there have been a lot more government MPs. But I agree with the general consensus that we do need to change our electoral system. And I think what's interesting is that we're hearing a lot more voices, perhaps unsurprisingly, on the right that are now coming out for electoral reform. Surprise, surprise,
but
when they're the ones who are going to lose out from the current system.
But you're saying it now, and you're on the left.
I've been saying it for years.
I think lots of people have been saying this from the right and the left, but because I'm sure the Labour Party at one point were pushing for proportional representation.
Well, indeed.
And now they've changed their view, and now they're trying to get 16 and 17-year-olds to vote who are more likely to vote Labour, which I think there should be. If you're going to do that, there should be a referendum for this.
I think there is a real problem, guys. I acknowledge this, OK? I don't want reform anywhere near Parliament if possible, but nonetheless, 6 million of us, it looks from the polls, do want reform to have representation. And if they don't have any representation, if they don't even win a single seat, that's a problem, because you then have a chunk of the population, an important chunk of the population, who feel disenfranchised. I suspect Nigel Farage will win his seat, and if he does, he will at least be able to be a spokesman for those people from within Parliament. I agree it's a problem. I'm not quite sure what the answer is.
Well, I think it's really interesting because under the European election system, we did have a more proportional system. And so under that system, which actually changed from first past the post to having a sort of more proportional system in, I think, sort of 2004 it was that the system changed, or 1999. And so you did have a lot of UKIP MEPs in Parliament.
Well, he won in 2014.
For those of us who were in the European Parliament, we could see just how lousy they were. And I think if you had a lot of
Neil
reform
Hamilton,
MPs, you could see that.
You're talking about the UKIP. Neil.
They were so lousy that they forced the government to give us a referendum, which we won. And UKIP won the UKIP Euro elections in 2014, where I directed the UKIP campaign. So I'm satisfied with the results. But I mean, the problem is that the first past the post system works reasonably well if you've got a 2 or 3 party system. Where the system is fractured and splintered in the way that it's now become, with the parties in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, and with the Reform, as well as the Lib Dems, the Greens and so on, it simply doesn't work because it produces randomised results. And you can't predict the way that the seats are going to fall just by the percentage of the vote that you get. UKIP got, as I say, 12, 13% in 2015 and got 1 seat out of 6. This is a completely insupportable system, given the way that our electoral arithmetic has come to operate. Compared with when I was growing up.
OK, so I've got to go to the news, but I'm going to ask you all then this question. I want a yes or no. Is a massive majority undemocratic? Emma Wolfe?
No.
Not
Matthew Stadlen?
going to happen, but it would be tricky if it did.
Yes or no?
I think it would be difficult.
So what are you saying?
Challenging. Yes.
Jonathan Liss?
No, not undemocratic, but not good for politics.
OK. And finally, Neil Hamilton?
Yes, undemocratic.
OK, thank you so much for your thoughts. Really good to talk to all of you there. Listen, Jonathan Liss, writer and broadcaster, Emma Wolfe, political commentator, Matthew Stadlen, and also Neil Hamilton. Right, this is GB News, coming up to 31 minutes after 4 o'clock. We're live on TV, online, and on digital radio. We'll continue with the Great British Debate. I'm asking